What would you say if an officer held out a breathalyzer right now and told you to blow? If you answer too fast, you can give away rights you still have. And if you answer the wrong way, you can also make your situation worse. Hit subscribe right now because what you're about to hear could protect your license, your case, and your future. Like this video now so you can find it again when you actually need it. You need to know something right away. This video is not about acting tough, being rude, or refusing everything. It's about not walking blind into a trap. Most people have no idea there are two very different moments when an officer may ask for a breath test. One is often a roadside screening. The other can be a post-arrest test with very different rules. If you mix those up, you can hurt your own case in seconds. I've analyzed over 200 body cam videos, and you would be shocked how many drivers talk themselves into bigger problems before the machine even turns on. Let me show you exactly what to say before you ever agree to anything, how to stop yourself from volunteering extra evidence, how to keep the stop from growing bigger, and how to avoid the one panic move that makes officers dig harder. Now let's talk about why this matters so much to you. A traffic stop can feel small at first. You think maybe it's just a lane drift, a broken light, or rolling through a stop sign. Then the officer smells alcohol, sees nervous hands, or hears you talking too much. In your head, you think being extra helpful will make this go away. So you start guessing, explaining, apologizing, and agreeing. Here's the reality. That's exactly when you lose control. A lot of drivers think saying yes to everything makes them look innocent. It often does the opposite. It gives the officer more to observe, more to write down, and more to use later. Your goal is not to win an argument on the roadside. Your goal is to stay calm, know what is voluntary, know what is required, and make clean choices that do not hand over more than the law already allows. The first thing you need is one sentence before any breathalyzer talk goes further. Listen closely because this is critical. You do not start by saying yes. You do not start by saying no. You start by getting the officer to tell you what kind of test this is. Here's exactly what you say. Officer, is this a voluntary roadside test or are you ordering me under state law? Word for word, memorize that line. Here's the trick they don't want you knowing. That sentence forces clarity. It makes the officer say whether you're dealing with a roadside screening or a required post-arrest test, and that difference can change everything for you. Why does that line work so well for you? Because it slows the moment down, it keeps you from making a blind decision. It also creates a clean record if the body cam is running. Defense attorneys use this exact line in court because it shows you were trying to understand your legal duty before acting. That matters. If the officer says it's voluntary, now you know it's not some automatic command you must obey on the spot. If the officer says you're under arrest and it's required by state law, now you know refusal may trigger license penalties or worse, depending on your state. That is why you never guess. Bad way. Most drivers say, sure, whatever you need, officer. Then they agree without knowing what stage they're in, and they can't later explain why they said yes. Good way. Smart drivers say, officer, is this a voluntary roadside test or are you ordering me under state law? Then they force the issue into the open before they decide anything. This is 100% legal. You are not fighting. You are asking a clear question. You are making the officer identify the rules before you act. That is smart, that is calm, and that is exactly how you protect yourself. Now for the legal backup in simple English. In Birchfield v. North Dakota, the Supreme Court said breath tests after a lawful DUI arrest are treated differently from blood tests. In plain English, that means police usually do not need a warrant for a breath test after arrest, but blood is more protected because it is more invasive. So if you're under lawful arrest, a required breath test can carry real refusal penalties in many places. That is why this tactic is not always refuse. It is always ask what this is first. And in Missouri v. McNeely, the court said police do not get a free pass to skip warrants for blood every time just because alcohol fades over time. In plain English, the rules matter and the stage matters. This comes straight from Supreme Court rulings. Let me show you exactly why that first sentence can save you from making the wrong move for the wrong test at the wrong time. Have you ever been asked to do a breath test or field test during a stop? Tell me in the comments because I want to know how the officer phrased it to you. The second tactic protects you from the stop growing bigger than it should. After the basic stop tasks are done, or when the officer starts drifting into extra fishing questions, you need a calm status check. You look at the officer and say this: am I being detained or am I free to leave? Those exact words. Keep your voice flat, no attitude, no speech, just the question. Why does this help you so much? Because officers often rely on confusion. If you feel like you have to stand there and keep talking forever, you usually will. You start filling silence with excuses. You say where you came from, how much you drank, when you ate, why your eyes are red, why you swerved, why your friend was loud, why you're nervous. Every extra sentence becomes evidence, but when you ask if you're being detained or free to leave, you make the officer choose. If you are free to go, the stop should end. If you are being detained, then at least the line is clear and you know this is serious. Bad way, most drivers say, I'm not hiding anything, ask whatever you want. Then the stop stretches out and the officer keeps collecting little pieces to build suspicion. Good way, smart drivers say, am I being detained or am I free to leave? Well, then the officer has to either end the contact or own the detention. Watch what happens when you use that line the right way. The whole tone changes. The officer knows you're not going to wander into a casual interview by accident. Former police officers have confirmed this works because it signals that you understand the stop has limits. You're not refusing to cooperate with basic legal commands. You're asking whether the stop is still tied to the original reason or whether it has now turned into a detention. That matters for you. And here's the case behind it. In Rodriguez v. United States, the Supreme Court said police cannot drag out a traffic stop longer than needed just to chase unrelated suspicions without a real legal reason. In plain English, they cannot turn a short stop into a long roadside investigation just because they feel like it. Your question does not magically end every stop, but it does help lock the moment down. It tells the camera, the officer, and later maybe the judge that you were not volunteering for an endless conversation. That can help your defense later, and it can keep you from talking yourself into worse trouble now. The third tactic is the one drivers mess up constantly. You cannot protect yourself just by going quiet and hoping that is enough. If the officer starts asking questions that can hurt you, you need to say your silence out loud. Here's exactly what you say. I am invoking my right to remain silent, and I do not want to answer questions without a lawyer. Say it slowly, say it once, then stop talking. This matters because silence by itself is messy. If you just stare, shrug, or pick and choose which questions to answer, you can create confusion. You might think you're being smart, but later that silence can be spun in ugly ways, especially if you never clearly claim the right. Here's the reality. A lot of people think movies taught them enough. They think clamming up alone does the job. It doesn't always. You need the clear sentence. Bad way, most drivers say, I only had 2 beers, but I'm fine to drive. Then they hand the officer a direct statement to use against them. Good way, smart drivers say, I am invoking my right to remain silent and I do not want to answer questions without a lawyer. Then they stop giving away evidence from their own mouth. This is 100% legal. You are not required to build the case against yourself with your own words. You do not need to explain your night. You do not need to guess your drink count. You do not need to answer trap questions like where you were, what time you left, or whether you feel buzzed. When you talk, you help them. When you clearly invoke your rights, you stop helping them. And yes, there is a case for this too. In Salinas v. Texas, the Supreme Court said in plain English that just staying quiet is not always enough. If you want the protection, you usually need to clearly say you are using your right to remain silent. That is the big lesson for you. Do not mumble, do not play games, do not half answer. State it clearly, then be quiet. Watch what happens when a driver stops volunteering instead of trying to charm the officer. The whole roadside dynamic changes. The officer may still do what the law allows, but you stop feeding the fire. That is a huge win for your future case. 90% of drivers don't know what's coming next. Stay with me, because this next part is where a simple DUI stop often turns into a full car search. The fourth tactic is not about the breath machine itself. It's about everything else that starts happening around you once the officer thinks you've been drinking. You need one clean sentence that blocks voluntary searches. Here's exactly what you say. Officer, I do not consent to any searches. Short, respectful, clear. Say it if they ask to look in your car. Say it if they ask to check your bag. Say it if they try the soft voice routine and make it sound casual. Why is that line so powerful for you? Because consent is how a lot of searches happen. Not warrants, not dramatic chases, just a nervous driver saying, yeah, go ahead, that's it, one bad yes. And once you consent, you make your defense much harder. Legal experts agree this is your strongest protection when the stop starts spreading beyond the original issue. If they have another legal basis, they may still search, but you never want to be the one who made it easy. Bad way. Most drivers say, I guess you can look if you want. Then they hand over permission, and the search becomes much harder to challenge later. Good way. Smart drivers say, officer, I do not consent to any searches. Then they keep their rights intact even if the officer decides to act anyway. This comes from an old but important case called Schneckloth v. Bustamonte. In plain English, the Supreme Court said a search can be valid if your consent looked voluntary. That is exactly why your words matter so much. If you sound unsure, friendly, or pressured into saying yes, that yes can still count. So do not hand them that. Be calm, be respectful, be clear. You are not resisting. You are not pulling away. You are simply not giving permission. That one sentence can matter more than people realize. Now let's tie the whole legal picture together for you in plain English. Birchfield tells you breath and blood are not treated the same after a lawful DUI arrest. That is why your first question matters so much. You need to know whether the officer is asking for a voluntary roadside test or demanding a post-arrest test under state law. McNeely tells you police do not get an automatic shortcut around blood draw rules just because alcohol fades over time. That means details matter, and you should never assume every test request is identical. Rodriguez tells you a stop cannot just stretch forever without a proper reason. That supports your line about whether you are being detained or free to leave. Salinas tells you silence is stronger when you clearly invoke it out loud. And Schneckloth reminds you that saying yes to a search can be enough to sink your own challenge later. Here's the reality. None of these cases is magic by itself. But together, they show you the same lesson. Slow down, ask what is required, stop volunteering, keep your words clean. Now picture a real stop, because this is where you need to hear yourself say the lines. You're driving home late. You drift once, lights flash, you pull over. The officer comes up and says you were weaving. He smells alcohol. He asks where you're coming from. The wrong way starts fast. You laugh nervously. You say you're fine. You explain you only had a couple drinks. You agree to every question. Then he pulls out a breath device and says, blow into this for me. You say yes without asking what it is. Then he asks to look in your car because you seem nervous. You say, sure, I've got nothing to hide. Now the stop is bigger, your words are in the report, and your consent is on camera. Now the right way for you. You hand over your documents, you keep your hands calm, you do not argue. When the questions turn risky, you say, I am invoking my right to remain silent, and I do not want to answer questions without a lawyer. If the officer brings out a breath device, you say, officer, is this a voluntary roadside test, or are you ordering me under state law? If the stop starts dragging into extra questions, you ask, am I being detained or am I free to leave? If the officer asks to search, you say, officer, I do not consent to any searches. That is it. No speech, no debate, no fake law school lecture on the shoulder of the road. Watch what happens in that version. You do not solve the whole case on the roadside. That is not the point for you. The point is you stop making it worse. You force clarity. You avoid blind consent. You avoid extra statements. You avoid the nervous yes that opens your whole car. And if the officer still arrests you or still takes lawful steps, at least you did not help build the case with your own mouth. That matters more than most drivers realize. Next week, I'm breaking down exactly what to say when an officer claims they smell weed from your car. Subscribe now so you don't miss it, because that claim is used to justify searches every single day. So let's lock this in for you. First, never rush into a breath test without asking whether it is a voluntary roadside test or a required test under state law. Second, if the stop keeps stretching, ask whether you are being detained or free to leave. Third, do not trust silence alone when questions can hurt you. Clearly invoke your right to remain silent and ask for a lawyer. Fourth, never give away a search with a nervous yes. Keep your refusal clean and respectful. You do not need to be rude. You do not need to be dramatic. You just need to stay calm, know your lines, and stop handing over rights for free. Hit subscribe so you catch that next video on weed smell claims and car searches. Smash like if this script just gave you words you can actually use. And drop a comment telling me which line you're going to memorize first. Stay safe out there.